Yes, people, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are all doing well. So if you've seen this, Jim Ratcliffe has been doing the rounds, doing some interviews. I've just finished watching his interview with Gary Neville on the Overlap YouTube channel. It was a very fascinating interview, to be totally honest with you. Before we get into any specific details on that, I'm not the biggest fan of Jim Ratcliffe. Some of the decisions he's made since joined the club, involving ticket prices. You hear of people getting sat left, right, and centre. You hear of potential cuts to like MUDSA, former players associations, etc., etc. And you're thinking, what the hell is going on at this club? But what I would say is it's refreshing to actually hear someone that's on the ownership of Manchester United. Obviously, the Glazers own most of the club. They've been there since 2005. They've run the club into the ground. It's quite refreshing to have a co-owner who actually wants to front up and speak and answer tough questions. I wasn't sure whether Gary Neville would go a little bit easy on him. Gary Neville asked some really tough questions, particularly about the Glazers. I haven't watched the BBC interview, but I've read a lot of the quotes that have come from that one as well. So we're all across pretty much everything that Sir Jim Ratcliffe's been speaking about, and we'll get stuck into it. But yeah, my first immediate reaction was like, it's refreshing to actually hear someone speak about the decisions that's going on at the club, their plans for the club, in the future, hearing about the ground, where they want to take us, etc. It's refreshing. Now, you might not like some of the answers, and I think there were some answers, particularly about like the ticket pricing issue and a few of the other decisions to make cuts in certain areas, where Jim Ratcliffe kind of went, well, it's a club decision, not my decision. And you'd think that you'd be over some of these decisions. I know he's not going to be, the CEO or one of the main owners of the company is not going to be over every minute detail of it. But there are some things that you just have to be aware of, especially when, you come, and he spoke about it in the interview as well, like the intensity of being a co-owner of Manchester United, the scrutiny that comes with it. You can tell that he's feeling some of that. And when you know that's going to happen and it's already happening, you should be across pretty much all the decisions. Interestingly, on the ticket prices now, again, I don't agree with him, but he was saying, it was only 500 tickets that we increased to £66, and they have now reversed it, which shows that they, didn't like the fallback on it. And I was proud of Man United fans for coming out and kind of saying, we're not taking this. Did mention season ticket prices are going to go up, but wouldn't say by how much. And that, again, it's not just his decision, it's a club decision. So obviously there's things that are delegated to people to do. He's brought in a lot of the structure and the management structure. He spoke about how, they were still bringing people in because of gardening leave up until 3 weeks ago. And their job is to bring in the management structure, sort out the finances, which again, we'll discuss in a minute. It could be a long video. And kind of once they've got those two things, they can focus on the club improving and everything. But we'll skip through some of the stuff that he said at the start. It was, as I said, the scrutiny was intense. We've spoken about that bit already. He said they needed to make some difficult decisions. They didn't expect to win the league in year one, and they didn't think it would be a walk in the park. As for Eric Ten Hag, he said it was erratic under Eric, and they kind of had to figure out whether it was a result of the manager or the environment that the club had created. He said they played well in the final, like it was a cup final, but didn't against Palace. And on the decision to not sack Eric Ten Hag, said it was a regret of his, and that they were there for such a short time that they didn't really want to make one of those big decisions that early on. Now, look, I'd be a hypocrite if I thought they should have sacked him in the summer. Like I was saying, don't sack him in the summer. But one of the things is, like, if you knew you weren't sure on him, I kind of, let me sort my teeth out. I kind of can see why they would hold on, because if you haven't got a first choice there, then what you're going to need to do is basically just hold on a little bit and see if he can rescue the situation, which obviously he couldn't do in the end. So I can kind of see, I still think it was a bad decision in hindsight, but hindsight is, of course, a very fine thing, isn't it? So, that was a decision on Ten Hag, that it was a difficult decision, a big decision, too early for them to make, and that they did regret it a little bit. They said they're seeing progress under Ruben Amorim. And Gary Neville kind of pushed on this, and he was like, huh, what kind of like what are you talking about? He says all the signings that they made in the summer are settling, and that he's dealing with half a squad. And it was good to hear this, actually, because what he said about Amorim was that if you look at the wage bill of the players that Amorim has available to him, so excluding the likes of Sancho, Anthony, Rashford, who aren't at the club, you know, Mason Mount, Luke Shaw, he mentioned, has been injured for the last 2 years. If you include all those players that aren't at the club, not in Ruben Amorim's squad, he's going like the wage bill there is like a mid-table at best wage bill. And that, you know, if you compare it to that of Man City, Liverpool, etc., that Manchester United, you know, wouldn't expect to be competing with them. So obviously they were affording Ruben Amorim that time, and they spoke about how, you know, in the summer they're going to collaborate with him and all of the staff that are there, Omar Barada, etc., Jason Wilcox, and collaborate in the summer on, you know, bringing signings in. Again, very, very interesting to hear that side of things. And I'm glad that he does like Ruben Amorim, because I like Ruben Amorim. And I want to see Ruben Amorim given a good go. And he's got to make difficult decisions. You know, he's got to, you know, weigh up kind of who to get rid of whilst also keeping the squad healthy and all those kind of things. He's had to make difficult decisions around Anthony, Rashford, etc. And again, Ratcliffe was asked whether he supported those decisions. And he was again fully behind the manager in terms of making those decisions. He said they've inherited a situation, some decisions they wouldn't have made. Sorry if I look down, I'm looking at my phone for the notes that I've made. Having to pay for players that they've inherited still. 89 million goes out this summer for players that we've already got on our books, including the likes of Jadon Sancho and co. We're still paying for him. Yes, now we're going to receive 25 million probably from Chelsea for him, which could be paid, if it's not paid in a lump, it could be paid over whatever his contract is, or whatever the deal is already agreed on that one. So if you're not getting that 25 million up front, you know, you're already 17 million down on Sancho in the summer. And that 25 million will balance it out, and it will see you make 8 million profit. But that's just this year. That's not including the money we've already paid out on Sancho. So again, they're talking about decisions they've inherited. That's why it was interesting rather, when Gary Neville pushed him on the Glazers and speaking about all the bad decisions they've made, the dividends, the debt, etc. Now, I thought Gary was going to softball him on this one. And this one is where I got to stand up and say, you know what, fair play to Gary Neville, because he did go in on the Glazers in this interview. And he's saying, like, look what you've inherited. You've inherited all the criticism from the Glazers. He's trying to kind of poke and prod Ratcliffe into criticising the Glazers. Now, he didn't do that, but he did kind of allude to the fact that they've made some very, very bad mistakes in the ownership of the club. And they said they kind of gave the last management team, which I guess is like Murtaugh, Woodward, etc., too much rope to kind of make decisions willy-nilly. On the staff as well, which I found interesting again. Again, it's nice to just hear clarity on some of these things. And sorry if I'm kind of all over the place, but we heard Man United had lost money for the last 7 years. The last 4 years had been 350 million in losses. United could run out of money by the end of this year. A quote that he said was that you don't want the club to go bust by Christmas, alluding to some of these cuts in salary. And then he said United's salary increase of 100 million over the last 7 years. The salary that's not including players has also increased by 100 million, and revenues only increased by 100 million. So again, they're down 100 million on that. If you're spending more than you earn, it's the road to ruin, he mentioned. So they are focused on putting the house in order. You know, maybe in the future they can make more generous decisions, was one of the things he said when talking about free lunches and all these kind of things, and said that they couldn't put their head in the sand, because as we said, the club could go bust by Christmas. So again, very interesting to hear just how bad it had got under the Glazers. And imagine if, I know, like, again, there's criticism that should be had of Ratcliffe, and all those kind of things, but they've inherited such a bad situation. The club would have been fucked if these guys ever come and took 25% or whatever the percentages they've taken. And then when you think about that 25% that they've taken, like, the Glazers got paid for that too. United had to pay to kind of facilitate that deal going through. And again, Gary Neville was pushing him on this, and he wouldn't criticise them now. We can't expect him to criticise people he supposedly worked with. But what I loved was Gary said, Why don't you ask them to put their hand in their pocket? Because why don't they put their hand in their pocket? We paid $1 billion on the interest on the debt. The debt still remains. Over $500 million of debt. It's a joke. They're costing Manchester United so much money, and they continue to take out dividends left, right, and centre. This deal for them to take the club has cost Manchester United probably in the end be like $2 billion or something like that. Crazy. And then you don't factor in the cost of them just being our owners, like the mistakes they've made and everything. Look, it was a long interview. I suggest you go and watch it and read all the other stuff that's come out. I had some other quotes here, but I was pleased to hear him back Ruben Amorim and kind of point out some of the things I've been trying to point out on the squad. Obviously, he has the insight onto like the finances and the wage bill and all those kind of things. He said he really, really likes Amorim, very thoughtful guy. Every time I go to the training ground, I speak with him, sit down and have a coffee with him and tell him where it's going wrong, and he tells me to fuck off. I like him. There's no money left in the club, and that is after his 300 millions. Another quote. He said he sat down with Sir Alex on the Sir Alex Ferguson decision and said to him that the club is spending more money than it's making and that we're going to be in trouble. We can't afford to keep paying him $2 million a year. I gave him time to think about it, and he came back 3 days later and after speaking to his son and said, fine, I'm going to stand down. That's my decision. I think that's a very good reflection on Sir Alex because he put the club before himself. What a man Sir Alex Ferguson is, by the way, because he could have probably made an issue out of that. Again, one of those decisions you don't want to see the club making. This club is has one of the highest revenues, and yet because of the Glazers sucking money out of the club left, right, and centre, we're in this situation. But yeah, that's some of the quotes anyway. Go check it out. It's all very intriguing. Like I said, refreshing to hear from someone that's in control of Man United. And wait, there was another quote as well, which I think for an optimist to hear like me, he said, next 5 years, most profitable club, winning silverware with the best stadium. That's the challenge he's setting himself and the team. And fingers crossed they can do it because Man United fans expect. But look, some of the things we don't want to hear in there. And I think he dodged some of the questions, going and saying like, oh, it's not my decision, etc. But it's also good to hear some clarity on some things, even if it is how bad the fucking situation is. Anyway, I've been AdamMcKola. I'm out of here.